It's the middle of winter and cookie season, so I'm making an artisanal style cookie mold, also known as a springerle. So I start the process by sketching out the designs that I intend to carve. Now, springerles are traditionally made out of wood, but I'm going to be making mine out of clay so that I can make multiples out of the same blank. I ended up deciding to use the stag instead of the snowman, and after I'd finished the sketch, I put on some transfer paper or parchment paper over top to trace the design through. This is what's going to allow me to impress the design into the clay and transfer it without having to redraw everything again. I don't need to put all the shading details in for this, just the basic outline so that I know where to carve. I'll reference the sketch later on as I start to carve away the blank. After the sketch is done, I will prepare the clay for making the blank for the press mold. I'm using porcelain here because it is the finest clay and allows me to get the most details for the longest period of time, whether that's leather hard or through bone dry. So I'm hammering it out to get it to be a rough rectangle, and then I'll press the transfer paper over top, and then I'm just going to try to trace the design through as accurately as I can. Again, I don't need to put in all the shading or values. That will come with the carving. I'll cut off the excess here and prepare it for the first carving stage. Unfortunately, I had some issues with my footage from the very beginning of the carving stage, so I don't have that, but you'll see me pick up midway through. So after patting the sides and carving the lower sections away, I begin to work on the details, the places that should be lower and the places that should be higher. So I'm trying to carve everything, round everything away from a high midpoint. This is also the part where I'm starting to look for the details that I want to show up later. So the parts of the fur and the parts of the hip, little features that I want to dip in or protrude out. This stage is really important to try to get it as accurate and as neat as I want it, because later, in theory, all of the details that I put into this stage will show up when I press this into the press mold, or when I press it to make the mold. Also, something that's really important is when you're making a press for a press mold is to make sure that your carving is not undercut. So in other words, I can't carve underneath my sculpture too much so that when I press it into the mold, clay doesn't get stuck back in there. So here I'm just adding in the details for the face and for the fur, and I'm going back in and adding the details in for the antlers as well. And then lastly, to finish it up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this brush and I'm going to get a little bit of water, and I'm going to clean up all of the areas that I couldn't clean up with the carving tools. The blank ended up looking something like this before being fired. At this point, it's ready to go into the bisque fire and begin to use to make our molds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign the back with the date and the time, my name, and my maker's mark. And we're going to send this off to the bisque kiln. After being bisque fired, it'll look something like this, and it's ready now to begin making the press mold. So again, I'm going to hammer out a bit of clay. Again, porcelain, because it holds the most detail. And I'm going to press the mold firmly into the clay. Now, this is after several times of doing this. It took a little bit of practice to get it right. And I'm going to cut off the excess of the clay that got pressed out from underneath the mold. After this, I'm going to press the walls back up against the side of the mold so that when I press the cookie in, I have a little bit of a ledge to hold in the dough. After pressing, it looks like this. This is what will become the finished piece. So after pressing, I need to come back through with a paintbrush again, just a paintbrush and water, to clean up any cracks that formed when the clay was being pressed out under the mold. So I come back through and I brush up any of those small features. After bisque firing, it looks like this. I think it came out pretty well and has held a lot of the detail. We're ready now to make the dough, and springerle dough is very specific. It has to hold its shape when baking. A lot of the times when you bake a cookie, they rise in the oven and then lose all of that fine detail that you put in. So the key here is when you're making these, you actually have to leave them sit out for 24 hours. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna roll the dough out and press the mold into the dough. If you do this the other way around, specifically with the clay, it just sticks to the mold. So I found that this is the best way to do it, is to dust the surface with either flour or cornstarch and to press the mold directly into the dough. So that's what I did. Ended up with several good cookies. And after they came out of the oven, they looked like this. It was a really long process overall, but in the end, now I have the ability to make really unique and beautiful cookies for friends and family. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one.